So we're going to begin our second organ system today. So we just finished the integument. Remember, that was an organ system. So we talked about this already, but remember, it's this pyramid, and we talked about it on the very first day. Down here's the chemical level, and then the cell level, and then we go to tissues, and then we're going to go to organ systems, and that's basically where we're going to stop, and we're going to spend the rest of the two courses at organ systems. So we finished one organ system. That was the integument. So now we're about to start the skeletal system. So if you look at the skeletal system, if you look at this picture, look, it's a pretty good idea of what it's going to be about. So here's a picture of what the skeletal system looks like in the human. So before we start talking about it specifically, let's think about why we have a skeletal system. I mean, why do we even have it? Well, there's lots of reasons. One is support. Think about what you would be like if you had no skeletal system. In other words, what would happen is you would collapse to the floor. You'd be like a puddle on the floor of tissue because you'd have no support. So that's one big function. Another thing is bones and the skeletal system often provide sort of cases. So there's a case, a bony case, the skull, which protects the brain. So the brain is completely enclosed in this bony case. The same thing's true for the spinal cord. It's inside this vertebral column, and it's a bony case. Even the heart, the lungs, we have a rib cage around them. And so even though it's not solid, it's still protective. It's like bars on your windows or something. And then same thing is even true down in the pelvis, because the pelvis looks like a bowl and there's organs inside this bowl, like the bladder, the rectum, all reproductive organs are down in the pelvis. And so that also is this sort of protective encasement. And then another thing it does is our muscles are attached to it. Well, muscles, we talked about them in histology, remember, are specialized to contract, but not just contract, not just shorten, but contract or shorten forcibly. And so they contract and they pull on things. Well, they have to have something to pull on. And so what they pull on is the skeletal system. So it provides this leverage for muscles so we can get movement. Otherwise, the muscle would just shorten like this and nothing would happen. But if you put a bone on both ends and it shortens, the bones move. And then another function of bones is when you look at bone tissue, which we're going to do it today, bone tissue has a lot of minerals in it. A lot of, mostly calcium, but a lot of other minerals too. And so bones sort of act like a bank for minerals. And just like any bank, you can add stuff to it, but you can also take stuff out. And so we can store materials like minerals in our skeletal system. A lot of bones are also hollow. And in those hollow spaces, we can put other things like fat. We can also put the materials that make blood cells in those hollow spaces. And then, believe it or not, the skeletal system actually makes hormones. We haven't spent much time talking about hormones, but hormones are one of the two primary regulators in the body. The nervous system is one, and the endocrine system is the other. And those systems control all of the other systems. So we don't usually think of the skeletal system as being a controller, an endocrine organ, but it is. It makes a hormone. And then lastly, because we not only have bones, we have these things called joints. When we get movements, the movements can be in different directions. And then joints also hold the skeleton together. So when we go back and look at this, it's more than just bones, and it's more than just holding you upright. It has lots of different functions. So before you spend too much time, you need to think about these functions, and then remember that the function is going to determine the anatomy, the shape. But let's talk about the skeletal system. So we already know skeletal system is bones, but that's not all it is. It's also cartilages. Remember we talked about cartilages in histology, and it's also joints. Well, joints have their own chapter, and so we're not going to talk about joints right now because they have their own whole chapter where they're discussed, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But for now, we're going to kind of ignore them. We are going to talk about cartilages, and we are going to talk about bones. So let's look at cartilages. Hopefully you remember that there's 3 types of cartilages. Everybody remember the 3 types? What are the 3 types of cartilages? Anybody remember? There's fibrous, yes. What else? No, not reticular. Elastic, yes, that's a cartilage. But what's the most common kind of cartilage? Hyaline, that's right. So there's 3 types of cartilage, but of those 3 types of cartilage, only 2 of them are part of the skeletal system. There's no elastic cartilage in the skeletal system. So in the skeletal system, we have these 2 types of cartilages. And if we look at this picture, everywhere that you see blue, that blue represents hyaline cartilage. So look at where it is. It's all over the place. It holds the ribs to the sternum right here. It's on the ends of every single long bone in your body. And there's a lot of it. Now we also have it in the trachea, and we also have it in the bronchi, and we also have it in the nose. But again, those are not part of the skeleton. And then we have this other cartilage, and that's fibrous cartilage. Well, if you look at this picture, fibrous cartilage is colored red. So look, it's between all of the vertebrae. So there's a stack of these cartilages, like there's a stack of these vertebrae. It's also found in the knee, and so it provides cushioning and stability for the knee, and it's also found here between the 2 pubic bones. So it is also part of the skeleton. If you look at elastic cartilage, though, elastic cartilage, remember, it's only found in a couple of places. It's found in your external ear, but that's not part of the skeleton. And it's found in the epiglottis, but that's also not part of the skeleton. So there's no elastic cartilage in the skeletal system. Does that make sense to everyone? So what are the 2 cartilages that you find in the skeletal system? What are the 2 you find? Fibrous and, no, not elastic. There's no elastic. Fibrous and hyaline. Elastic is only found in the external ear and in the epiglottis. And those are not part of the skeletal system. But these 2 are. So let's review these cartilages a little bit. So this is exactly what we went over when we did histology. Remember, there's 3 types. We just talked about that. If you remember, cartilages have no blood vessels. They also have no nerves. Well, if you have no blood vessels, also no nerves, if you have no blood vessels, that means that you don't have much nutrition. And so if you have low nutrition, that means that you're going to grow very, very slowly. So they do. They grow slowly. They also heal very, very slowly. So if you damage cartilage, it's going to take forever for it to heal, if it ever heals. So you could break a bone and tear cartilage at the same time. The bone will heal in a few months, 3 to 4 months. But the cartilage may never heal, and if it does, it's going to take years to heal. That's how slow it is. Another thing about cartilages, because they have no blood vessels, they have to get their nutrition from somewhere, and so they're surrounded by something called the perichondrium. Peri means around, chondro means cartilage, and that's where the blood vessels and nerves are. So if this is cartilage, there's no blood vessels, no nerves in it, but surrounding it is this other layer of tissue. It's dense, irregular is what it is, and in that tissue is where we're going to find the blood vessels, and it's where we're going to find the nerves. So nutrition has to diffuse from these blood vessels through the cartilage to get wherever it needs to go. And that's why it takes so long. It's why it's so slow. And that's why they heal and grow so slowly. But here's what that perichondrium looks like. So here's the perichondrium right here. Again, it's dense, irregular connective tissue. So if you look in here, you're going to see a lot of collagen. You're going to see some elastin. And again, this is where the blood vessels are located, and this is where the nerves are located. But if you look at the cartilage itself, it looks like this up here. Now this happens to be hyaline cartilage, but it's cartilage. Remember, cartilage has chondrocytes. They're sitting in these little spaces called lacunae. And then it has this matrix, and the matrix is gel-like. It's like a firm gel. And so it's flexible, it's bendy, and so on. Well, all cartilages have these characteristics here, but they don't all look the same. But hyaline looks like that. Remember, hyaline's the most abundant cartilage. And here are all those places we talked about where you can find it. And so look, these are part of the skeleton. Now these are not, but it's still part of the skeleton. So this hyaline cartilage is very supportive, it's very flexible, has a lot of resilience so that it doesn't wear very easily. And again, here are the places where you can find it. And here's what it looks like under a microscope. Remember, it looks like Swiss cheese. The fibers here are so dense. Remember, they're so packed. We can't see individual fibers, but there's lots of fibers in there. They're just packed together with no spaces between them. Elastic cartilage, remember, is not in the skeleton. It's not part of the skeletal system. And so we really shouldn't be talking about it now, but we'll go ahead. It's very similar to hyaline, but instead of having a lot of collagen, it's got a lot of elastin. And so elastin, remember, gives you stretch, but it also gives you this sort of snap back kind of thing, this recoil. And so these tissues have stretch and recoil. And so you find it in the external ear, you find it in the epiglottis. But again, this is not part of the skeleton. This is not a skeletal cartilage. But when you look at it, here are the places you find it. So there's the external ear. There's the epiglottis right there. And if you look at it under the microscope, look, here's our perichondrium over here, and here's the perichondrium. Remember, that's dense, irregular connective tissue, and this is where the blood vessels are, and it's where the nerves are. Same thing over here. But there's none in the middle. But look, what we do have in the middle are all of these dark staining fibers, and these dark staining fibers are the elastic fibers. Those are elastic. And so that's what gives this tissue its property of stretch and recoil. So here you can see the perichondrium. There it is again over here. Here are these dark staining fibers that give it stretch and recoil. So Zoe says, can you point out it in the hyaline? I don't think it's visible, but we'll go back and look. Yeah, it's just not visible. It's over here somewhere. It's off the slide, so it's out here somewhere. Same thing on this one. It's off the slide. It's way over here somewhere. These, they just are showing it to you this way in a low magnification. Okay, let's look at the third cartilage. So this is fibro or fibrous. Either one is correct. Remember, it's called fibrous because we can see the fibers. It has these collagen fibers, and they're big and thick, and they're coarse, and they're very visible. And so that's why it's called fibrous cartilage. And so the fibers are like this, but they're spread out. And because they're spread out with matrix in between, if you put pressure on them, what they do is they absorb the pressure. So they bend in and they absorb the pressure. And so they act like cushions. And so we find these mostly in these intervertebral discs where they act like cushions. So if you look at the vertebrae, they're like this. They're stacked up. But if you were to jump up and down and they were just like this, they would bang into each other. But to prevent that from happening, what we have is this fibrocartilage in between. And so this is that intervertebral disc. And here's another one. And what they do is they're going to absorb the shock. They also attach and hold the vertebrae in place. And so they also keep the spine in alignment. But they're mostly there to absorb shock because they resist compression. And so when you look at it, here's where you find it. We find it in here. There's the intervertebral disc. But you also find it in the knee. So these pads right here, they're sort of C-shaped. They're actually called semi-lunar because they look sort of like a half moon. But they're also the same thing. They absorb shock. So if you jump up and down, these bones don't bang into each other because there's this cushion in between. Same thing is true here. There's this cushion. Again, it holds the bones in place, so it attaches them together, but it also provides this cushion. If you look at it under a microscope, you can see these fibers. So all of these, even though they're blue, they're mostly collagen. And here's our cells. They're in the lacunae, the chondrocytes. If we look at it, blow it up a little bit. Again, here you can't see the perichondrium. It's off here, off the slide somewhere. But we can see the fibers. And you can see that if you apply a lot of pressure here or a lot of pressure here, because they have all these little spaces in here, it's sort of like a cushion and it absorbs the shock. So Johannan says, so collagen stains blue and elastin stains black. Well, that's not totally true. The color is the color of the stain. So whatever color this is, that's the color of the stain. And you can use, just like you can dye cloth different colors, you can use different stains. Collagen in most tissues, the stain that we use makes them look pink. But in this tissue, the stain that's most commonly used makes them look blue. So color is not a good way to identify tissues. So Muhammad says, do collagen contain any vessels? I'm not sure what that means. Are you talking about fibrous cartilage containing blood vessels? Is that what you mean? So fibrous is cartilage. No cartilage has blood vessels. No cartilage has blood vessels. So hyaline doesn't, elastic doesn't, and neither does fibrous. No blood vessels, and also no nerves. Those are in the perichondrium. Okay, so those are the cartilages. We already knew that. Hopefully you didn't learn anything then. It's just a review. But what we haven't talked about is how cartilages grow. So cartilages actually grow two different ways. One way is when the cartilage is added to the surface. In other words, there's cartilage here, and we're going to build new cartilage on top of the surface that's already there. And this is called appositional growth. But there's another way, and that's where cartilage is added to the inside. So if all of this is cartilage, we're going to add more cartilage here in the middle. It's not added to the surface, it's added to the middle part, and this is called interstitial growth. So a good analogy for this would be like this. So look, this is one of those pull-out beds. Has anybody ever slept on one of these pull-out beds? Are they comfortable, you think? No, they're not comfortable. Look, this mattress is very thin and there's metal underneath it. They're not comfortable at all. So if you got invited to stay at somebody's house, if you were going to stay there for a day or two, this might be all right. But if you were going to be there for very long, you'd get really tired of this pretty fast. Well, there are two ways to make this mattress more comfortable. One way is we could go out and we could buy a mattress pad. And so look, what we did was we made this mattress thicker. We made the mattress thicker, but where did we add to the mattress? We added on top of what was already there. So we added the material to the surface. And when you do that, it's called appositional growth. Does it make sense, everybody? So look, the mattress got thicker, the cartilage got thicker, but where was the new mattress, the new cartilage added? It was added to the surface of what was already there. But look, there's another way you could do this. You could unzip this thing and you could start shoving more stuffing in there. And this mattress is going to get thicker. So it's going to get like this thick. But where was the new material added? It wasn't added on the surface, it was added here in the middle. That is interstitial growth. So in both cases, what's going to happen is the cartilage is going to grow. This thing is going to get thicker. It just depends on where we add the new material. We're either going to add it on the surface of what is already there, or we're going to open it up and add it to the middle part here in the center. Again, what is this called when you add it to the surface? It's appositional growth. And what is it when you add it in the middle? Interstitial growth. That's exactly right. So Deja says, what happens when the cartilage gets damaged and doesn't grow back? Well, you wind up with a loss of function. We do need cartilage. So depending on where that cartilage is, that part of your body is not going to work as well. But cartilage does grow and cartilage does heal. It just happens very, very, very slowly. It takes a long time. But anyway, everybody understand appositional growth and interstitial growth? So let's look at what it really looks like. So when we're talking about appositional growth, remember it's on the surface of the cartilage that's already there. So what happens is that there are cells in the perichondrium. And what they're going to do is they're going to turn into chondroblasts. And those chondroblasts are going to make new cartilage. And we can see it. If we look at it, it looks like this. Here's our perichondrium right here. And here's the cartilage down here. And what's going to happen is right here on the surface, on the cell, these cells are going to turn into chondroblasts. And they're going to secrete matrix. And so look what happens. As we add more matrix, this cartilage is getting thicker. We're adding more matrix. The cartilage is getting thicker. But where was the new cartilage added? It was on the surface, on the face of the old cartilage. Here's old and here's new. It's just like that mattress pad. Here's the old mattress pad down here, or old mattress, and there's the new mattress pad we added on top of it. It's on the surface. Well, we can actually see that happening if we look at a slide of cartilage. So remember, we're going to look at the perichondrium, and right next to the perichondrium is where we're going to find this new cartilage that's formed. So here's a slide. So here's our perichondrium right here. And look, there are new cells that are being produced, and these new cells are adding cartilage. So this is new cartilage. Look how much smaller and thinner it is than the old cartilage down here. So we're going to add more matrix here, and more matrix, and more matrix. And so this is going to go from being that thin to that thick to that thick. We're adding new cartilage. But remember, it's on the face of the old cartilage. Look at it here. These are new cells. Look how small they are and how close together they are. But they start secreting matrix. And so this is new matrix. And the new matrix is going to be added on top of the old matrix, the old cartilage. So Priscilla says, I think you said bone takes time to grow. So why is it people break their arm or whatever, it takes time to remove their cast? Well, bone has to heal. So what I said was if you break a bone and tear cartilage at the same time, so you break a bone. So here's a bone and you're actually going to break it. It has to heal that break. But at the same time you tear cartilage, remember cartilage is over here somewhere and we're going to rip it or tear it. This is going to heal pretty quickly. It takes just a couple of months in order to get back to the way it was originally. But this heals very slowly and it takes a long time, even years, to get back to where it was originally. Does that make sense now, Priscilla? But back to this. Can everybody see where the new cartilage is? And look, what is it right next to? It's right next to the perichondrium. And so it was on the surface, it was added to the surface of the old cartilage. Okay, so that's one way. And here we are again. There's our perichondrium, here's our old cartilage, and here's new cartilage. And look how different it looks, how close the cells are to each other. There's a lot less matrix, but this part's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it gets bigger, the cartilage is going to get thicker and thicker. So that just says, is the old cartilage bigger in size? What happens is we're going to add matrix. So let's go back to this picture over here. So look at this right here, and you can see that there's very little matrix in between these cells. But these cells are going to start building matrix. So here they are right here, they're close to each other. But as they build matrix, what happens is they're going to move apart. So they're going to look like this now, because there's this new matrix in between. And it happens in this direction too. So what they wind up looking like after they add all this new matrix is they look like this. So the cells are not bigger, they're just further apart. And what we see is a lot of matrix in between. So look, this cartilage was only that thick, and it had 4 cells. But look, this cartilage is this thick, and it's still only got 4 cells, because this one has more matrix. And that's what we see right here. These cells are far apart. This is all matrix in between. And you can see it here. Here, look, there's the matrix, and there's not much to it. But here, look how much matrix there is. There's all of this is matrix. Now, new cells are also smaller. And so we can see that because they've just been created, because remember, they're going to go through mitosis. We're going to take one cell and we're going to divide it and we're going to get two cells. But originally we had to split this in half. So these two cells are going to be smaller. But they grow and they add matrix. Let's look at the other way that cartilage grows. Remember, this is interstitial. So if we go back to our analogy, it's where we opened up the mattress and we stuffed more mattress stuffing in the middle. And so the thing gets bigger, but here's where it got bigger, in between, not on the surface, but in the middle. And that's exactly what happens with interstitial. So if you look at interstitial, it's not this one up here. We just looked at it. It's this here. So if we look at this, look at that. And what happens is this is going to go through mitosis. And so it's going to divide. And so we're going to have two cells. But look how close they are to each other. Right here, they're like touching. Here, they're still almost touching. They're really close to each other. But what's going to happen is we're going to add more matrix. We're going to add more matrix all around it. And the cells are going to move apart. Or it looks like this. Here's our original cell, and here through mitosis. And then here, look, there's not much matrix there. But this cell's going to build matrix, and this cell's going to build matrix. And now look how much matrix there is. The cells are going to move apart. And so this cartilage was this thick. But now this cartilage is this thick. Even though there's only two cells here and there's only two cells here, there's still more cartilage over here because there's more matrix. And so if we look at it, it looks like this. So not this up here. We already looked at that. Let's don't look at that. Look down in here and you can see cells that are going through mitosis. So look, you can see that cell right there has not even finished mitosis. And then these cells right here, they haven't finished and so on. But these have finished, but look how little bit of matrix there is between them. Same thing with this one. But what's going to happen is they're going to build more matrix. And as they build matrix, they're going to spread apart. And then they're going to spread even further apart. And so as we build more and more matrix, we're building more and more cartilage. Same thing here, not up here, we already talked about that. But down here, look at these cells. So these cells are dividing right here. These have just finished and there's hardly any matrix. But look, these have separated and they're going to separate even more. They're going to add matrix. And as they add matrix, they're going to move apart. Does that make sense to everyone? Can everybody see it happening down here? So in one slide, in just a single slide, we can see cartilage growing both ways. Here's the perichondrium. So we're adding new cartilage here. That's on the surface of the old cartilage. And so that's appositional growth. But down here, look what is happening. They're dividing. And we're going to add new matrix here. And so the cells are going to spread out. And so we're adding new cartilage here as well. And that is interstitial growth. So any slide you look at, you're going to see both because both of them happen at the same time. So take a look at this slide and make sure you understand what's going on. This is a pretty nice summary slide that shows the two mechanisms by which cartilage grows. Any questions about it? So look, this one's not labeled, but here's our perichondrium. Here's new cartilage right here. What kind of growth is this? Do you remember? Appositional, that's exactly right. But there's also new cartilage happening in here. And in here, what kind of growth is that? Interstitial. So hopefully you got it. Everybody got it? So he says they look the same. Well, they are the same. They're both cartilage. They're both cartilage, but they're growing differently. Here, appositional, these cells change and they become chondroblasts. They didn't used to be chondroblasts. We're going to get new chondroblasts on the surface, and then we're going to get new cartilage because chondroblasts build cartilage. Same thing is true in here, except we start out with a chondroblast and it divides. So we're still getting new chondroblasts, but they're coming from one that was already a chondroblast. We're doing mitosis. And then we're going to get new cartilage. How can you tell it's going to the middle layer and the other? Well, you first have to find the perichondrium. So if you find the perichondrium, that's this, right? Remember, this is that membrane that's around all cartilages, where the blood vessels are and the nerves. So the growth that's happening next to the perichondrium is appositional growth. But there's also growth happening in here. It's not next to the perichondrium, it's inside, and that's interstitial. Let's go back to our analogy of the mattress. So look, if there's this mattress, if I want to make it thicker, I can do it either way, but I could also do it both ways. I could add a mattress pad on top, and I could unzip it and stuff it with more stuffing. So either way, it's making the mattress get thicker, but it's two different mechanisms that are happening. So appositional is this way, and interstitial is this way. Does it make sense now, Zoe? Okay, good. Anybody else have a question? Okay, well, those were cartilages. Let's look at bones. So here's a bunch of bones. Now these are all human bones. And look, they've all been stacked up like crazy. If you go to right outside of Paris, they have what are called the catacombs. And if you go into the catacombs, this is what they look like. They're just thousands and thousands and thousands of human bones. And these came from cemeteries. So Paris was a small place and it had lots of graveyards in it. And they wanted to be able to expand. They wanted to use this land. And so what happened was the church decided to dig up all of the bones, but they didn't want to treat them badly. And what they did was they used monks, and they told those monks to clean the bones and then to stack them so that they could be used or sorry, they could be treated good, well, and so on. But what happened was when they started doing this, after a while they got bored. It was just stacking bones, cleaning bones, stacking bones, cleaning bones. And so they started doing things like this. And so they started doing arrangements. And so they have things that look like this. They even have chandeliers made out of bones. So if you ever go to Paris, you can go to the catacombs and you can see all this. So if you're interested in anatomy, it's a pretty cool place to go. But be warned, they were not too long ago, about a year ago, some tourists got lost in here and they were stuck in here for about 3 days before they were able to find their way out. That's how big they are. But lots and lots and lots of bones. Look at them. It looks like a church, almost like a cathedral or something when you go in there. Here's some bones you might recognize. Recognize any of these? Anybody have any favorite cartoon characters? And you ever wonder what their skeletons would look like? So look, there's the Roadrunner. There's Tweety, Donald Duck. Excuse me. Anyway. Well, when you look at those bones, if you look at these, or certainly if you look at these, you should realize that they're not all the same. And so, just like we do with everything else, we break it into smaller parts and we classify it. And so there's different ways to classify bones. There's 3 different ways. There's location in the skeleton, there's the shape of the bone, and then there's the 2 types of bone. So let's look at how we classify bones. So Johannes says, sir, have you been there? Yes, I have been there. In fact, I took most of those pictures that you see, not these. I took that one, and I think I took that one. So yeah, I've been there. Weren't you scared? No, I wasn't scared. Okay. So 3 different ways to classify bones. So by location, and we're going to look at all of these, but let's look at location first. There are actually only 2 locations, 2 of them, and they're called divisions. So the skeleton is divided up into 2 divisions. And so we have the axial division or axial skeleton, and we have the appendicular division or appendicular skeleton. Let's look at what those are. So here's the axial skeleton. It's this part right here, and they have it colored this yellow color. And so what it includes is the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage, and that's it. So here's another picture, the skull, the vertebral column, rib cage. And so look, this is the long axis of your body. And so that's why it's called the axial skeleton. Well, if you count how many bones there are in this axial skeleton, there's a total of 80. 80 named bones in the adult. Children actually have more bones than adults do. But anyway, 80 named bones. And here they are. And we're going to go over all of these when we do lab, but we're not going to go over them today. The other division is the appendicular skeleton. And so look at this word. It comes from the same root word as appendages. And so the appendages of your body are things like the arms and the legs and the toes and the fingers and all that. And so when we look at it, that's what it is. So it's comprised of 2 girdles. There's a girdle here. A girdle is something that goes around. And then the arms and hands, and then another girdle right here, and then the legs and the feet. So that's the appendicular skeleton. So if you look at it in another picture, here it is. So there's that girdle up there, and then here's that girdle down here, and then the arms and hands, legs and feet. And if you count how many bones there are in this part of the skeleton, there's 126. So if we add 80 to 126, we get 206 bones. But this is in the adult, and they are 206 named bones. And you'll understand why I make those distinctions a little bit later on. But when we look at these, look at what they are. Here's those two girdles. There's the pectoral girdle, and there's the pelvic girdle. And then we have the arms and hands. So here are the arms, and then here are the hands. And then we have the legs, and we have the feet. So that's one way to classify bones. But when you look at bones, they're not all the same shape, and so we can also classify them by shape. And here are the shapes. So we have long bones, short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, and then this group which is called special. So if you look at a long bone, they look like this. Flat bones look like this. Short bones look like these right here. And then here's one of those special bones, and here's one of those irregular bones. Zoe, yes, we will take a break. Okay, well, let's finish this part first. So let's look at long bones. So long bones are these bones. So these are the long bones. This is a long bone, this is a long bone, but also these tiny, tiny little things right here are long bones. Long bones don't have to be very long, they're just longer than they are wide. But another characteristic of long bones is that they're hollow. So if you cut one open, you'll see a big hollow space. If you cut it long ways and cut it open, you'll see this big hollow space. That's called the medullary canal. So here's that medullary canal right there. Big hollow space. And because it's a big hollow space, you can put stuff in it. And we do. If you look at short bones are these little bitty, almost cube-shaped bones that we find in the hands and in the feet. Now, they're not the fingers and the toes. They're the bones of the wrist and the bones of the ankle. But here's what one of them looks like. Look, they're sort of cube-shaped. They're not perfect cubes, but they're sort of cube-shaped. And if you cut one of those open and there is no hollow space, it looks like this on the inside. No hollow space in there. Lots of little tiny spaces, but no one big hollow space. So if you do an X-ray, you can see that there's no big space in there. What we have is something that looks like this. These are long bones. So if we were to cut them open, there would be a hollow space in the middle. And then we have flat bones. Flat bones remind me of a sandwich. So if you think about a sandwich, there's a piece of bread and another piece of bread, and then there's whatever you put in your sandwich in between. And that's exactly what a flat bone looks like if you cut it open. So here's a flat bone. But these are also flat bones. And the ribs are also flat bones, and your collarbones are also flat bones. And look, that looks like a sandwich. So here's the two pieces of bread, and here's the stuff in between. And then we have irregular bones. So irregular bones are bones with weird shapes. They're just hard to describe. So if you look at something like a vertebra, look how weird it is. It's got this part, but then it's also got this part sticking out like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. It's a weird shape. It's complicated. These are also irregular bones. So look how complicated that shape is, and how complicated that shape is. And then the last one is special bones. And they're called special because, for one thing, they vary in number. They vary in number, which means some people have a lot of these, some people have hardly any. And then the other thing that makes them special is they only occur in special places, special locations. And you don't find them anywhere else. Well, there are two types of these. One type is called sutural. So look over here at the skull. And if you look at the skull, there are joints in the skull, and they look like this. It looks like someone just sewed it together. And the word for to sew is actually suture. And that's what these joints are called. They're called sutures. Well, most people, the sutures are just like this. And there's nothing any weird about them. But look at this right here. If we look at this person, look at what this suture did. Look, there's a little island right here and another island right here. Doesn't look like this, which is supposed to look like that. It has an island in it. And you can see a bunch of these over here as well. So these little island-like sutures, or inside the sutures, are called sutural bones. Again, they vary in number. So most people don't have any sutural bones. Most people's sutures just look like this. There are none of these in here. But this particular person, look, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's another one over there. There's a bunch of them. These do not have names. No names. They're just called sutural bones. What makes people get sutural bones? Nobody knows for sure, but most people think it has to do with an injury when you're a child. So think about children. They fall all the time, they bump things, and they often bump their heads. And so most people, when you bump your head, you get up and you cry and you rub your head or whatever. Don't worry about it. But sometimes that bump is actually a tiny, tiny, tiny little fracture. And then when the fracture heals, this is how it heals. Most people don't ever know they have these until they go and have an x-ray or something. I usually associate suture with previous, what is XS, SX? Surgery. Well, the reason we call that when you have surgery is because you cut people open and then you sew them back together. And the word to sew means suture. That's all it is, to sew. So even though these weren't sewn together, they look like they were. They look sewn. So they look like sutures. It makes sense now? Another place that we can have these weird little bones is inside tendons. But look, there's a tendon there, a tendon. Remember, a tendon connects a muscle to a bone. So that muscle is connected to that bone. Well, most of the time, you just have a tendon that looks like this, nothing weird about it. But if you use a tendon a whole lot, if you use it like crazy, what's going to happen is tiny little bones will grow inside it. And so one place where we use it constantly is right here. With every single step you take, we put stress on that tendon. And what happens is bones grow in it. And so those bones look like sesame seeds, just like you have on a Big Mac or something. And so they're called sesamoid bones. Make sense? Any questions? Here's one sesamoid bone that basically everybody has, and that's the patella, your kneecaps. So the patellae are weird bones because they grow inside a tendon. They grow inside the quadriceps tendon. The quadriceps is the muscle in the front of your thigh, and it has a tendon down to the lower leg. And this bone grows in here. And it doesn't, you're not born with patellae. They grow on later on. So Zoe says you either have them or you don't, or everyone has sesamoids. Well, everyone who's normal has this one for sure. And almost, I would say, everyone has the one on the bottom of the foot. This one. Now, if you're paralyzed from birth and you never walk, you never put stress on this tendon. And when there's no stress on the tendon, the bones don't grow. So not everybody has these, almost everybody, but not everybody, because there's some people who never walk. Same thing's true for this bone. If you never walk, you never crawl, you never do anything like this, you won't have one of these either. Another place where almost everybody has a sesamoid bone is right where your thumb attaches to the rest of your hand, right there. Anybody imagine why you would have a sesamoid bone at your thumb? Because just like your big toe, everyone uses their thumb constantly. We use it for everything that we grip, everything we pick up. And guess what? Most of the time this occurs when you're a teenager. That's when you get this bone. But now children are getting this bone earlier and earlier. In other words, they're not teenagers, they're younger children. So what do you think's different? Why are younger children getting this bone that's due to stressing this tendon? What is it that's changed over time so that children use their thumbs more? Anybody want to guess? What is something you do a lot of probably that your parents never did? So Benjamin says technology. What do you mean by technology, Benjamin? Yeah, it's texting. It's video games. It's things like that. We use our thumbs to do those things. And the more you stress this tendon, the sooner that little bone grows. Okay, and then there's one more type, or one more way to classify bones, and then we'll stop and take a break. And that is, if you look at bones, we have two different types, and we already talked about this when we talked about histology. But remember, we have dense bone or compact bone, that's this. And then we also have spongy bone, and that's this. Well, all bones have both. All bones have both. Well, remember, dense bone is the outer layer, and spongy bone is on the inside. Spongy bone is never on the surface. It's always on the inside. It's always covered up unless there's something wrong. It's always covered by this dense bone. And then when you look at spongy bone, what you're going to see are a bunch of tiny little strut-like structures, which sort of make it look like a honeycomb. And those things are called trabeculae. And so that's what these are, these little tiny structures. If you blow them up, they look like this, and those are called trabeculae. The word trabeculae means ridges, is what it means. And so you see all these tiny little bony ridges, and they create this honeycomb-like structure, or this thing that looks like sponge, and that's why it's called spongy bone. Any questions about any of that? Can everybody see the dense bone and everybody see the spongy bone? You don't need a microscope to see it. Well, you can see it with your naked eye. So the next time you eat a chicken leg or something, if you cut open the bone or break it, you'll see these things because you don't need a microscope. Any questions? Okay, so I think we're going to stop there and we'll take like a 10-minute break and then we'll. So I'm going to stop the recording.